This presentation is brought to you by Arizona State University's Julianne Wrigley Global Institute of Sustainability and a generous investment by Julianne Wrigley.
As I'll explain now in Stonyfield's story, this is really the story of my business and the entire $30 billion organic industry. Is that, while we pay attention to voting at the voting booth, which we get to do every 2 or 4 years in this wonderful country, we actually vote many, many times a day or per week in our shopping. And our view is that we deserve the same rights that citizens in really progressive countries like Russia and China and Saudi Arabia have, where labeling is allowed. So let me try to summarize what I've been blasting at you here, because it was all with a point, which is that a lot has changed since the middle part of the last century. You had the rise of sugar consumption. You had this sedentary lifestyles as we began to sit in front of screens more and more, and of course no more so than today. This is actually an ad from Life magazine, the year I was born. We've certainly seen a dramatic increase in chemicals. People think organic is this new thing, but all food was organic before 1945. In fact, every famous person in history ate only organic food. George Washington, Mozart, Jesus Christ, ate only organic. It's us who've been on this experiment with our bodies and the planet. And then, of course, the omega-3, omega-6 issue that I mentioned before. And when you put these four together, you realize that why we have the most expensive health care in the world. That is an absolutely direct consequence. And so what I hope I persuaded you is that there's a problem in not just how we act, but really how we think. And changing how we do business, changing how we're going to relate to the planet, changing how we treat our bodies really means changing how we think. And a wonderful illustration of this that was provided by the World Wildlife Federation is this one. If I asked you how much water was in this cup of latte that you might have had this morning, you would, of course, being sophisticated coffee drinkers like my friend here, you would say, well, it depends. Was it a tall or a grande or what have you for the number of ounces? But, we could agree that maybe it's somewhere between 12 and 16 ounces, or, let's call it a pint or a liter of water. But actually, when you do the math, you find out that the water footprint of a cup of coffee, one single cup, is far more dramatic than we think. It's roughly 208 quarts of water. There's, of course, the water that goes into the growing of the coffee, the water that goes into the cows, that goes into washing the dairies, the water that goes into the sugar production. But then there's all the industrial needs over here on the left that also use water. And we don't think in these terms. We think reasonably the water that's in the cup is about how much water went in. And really this business about thinking is that we need to understand that there's a footprint. We're starting to get into the vernacular now to talk about our carbon footprint. But we have a water footprint. We have a toxins footprint. We have all kinds of footprints, and until we understand the ramifications that for everything we buy and we own, there's a far larger footprint in our supply chain, we don't have a chance of reversing many of these trends. And so I sort of summarize all of this by saying that to my mind, these are modern day myths, as I mentioned in the intro, that have really governed our modern existence. These are not things that we would say consciously. I think people might be embarrassed to even say this, that the earth is a subsidiary of our economies, but it is actually how we behave. We behave as if the earth is ours for the taking and ours for the dumping. It's sort of this God or naturally given right to dominate, to take advantage of her. And of course, the exact opposite is true. This is precisely the reciprocal of reality. The reality is all human economies have been made possible by a bountiful earth. And if we take care of her, there's no reason to believe that we can't have bounty for a long, long time. But this fundamental myth prevents us from getting there.
This presentation is brought to you by Arizona State University's Julianne Wrigley Global Institute of Sustainability for educational and non-commercial use only.